Presently they came to an old man lying asleep on the lawn outside his cottage. "There," said Pippi, "that man is lying on the ground, and we have found him. We'll take him." Tommy and Annika were utterly horrified. "No, no, Pippi, we can't take an old gentleman." "We couldn't possibly," said Tommy. "Anyway, whatever would we do with him?" "What would we do with him? Oh, there are plenty of things we could do with him. We could keep him in a little rabbit hutch instead of a rabbit and feed him on dandelions. But if you don't want to, I don't care. Though it does bother me to think that some other thing finder may come along and grab him." They went on. Suddenly Pippi gave a terrific yell. "Well, I never saw the like," she cried, as she picked up a large rusty old tin can from the grass. "What a find! What a find! Cans, that's something you can never have too many of." Tommy looked at the can doubtfully. "What can you use it for?" "Oh, you can use it in all sorts of ways," said Pippi. "One way is to put cookies in it. Then it becomes a delightful jar with cookies. Another way is not to put cookies in it. Then it becomes a jar without cookies. That certainly isn't quite so delightful, but still that's good too." She examined the can, which was indeed rusty and had a hole in the bottom. "This looks almost as if this were a jar without cookies," she said thoughtfully. "But you can put it over your head and pretend that it is midnight." And that is just what she did. With the can on her head, she wandered around the block like a little metal tower and never stopped until she stumbled over a low wire fence and fell flat on her stomach. There was a big crash when the tin can hit the ground. "Now, see that," said Pippi, and took off the can. "If I hadn't had this thing on me, I'd have fallen flat on my face and hurt myself terribly." "Yes," said Annika, "but if you hadn't had the can on your head, then you wouldn't have tripped on the wire fence in the first place." Before she had finished speaking, there was another triumphant cry from Pippi, who was holding up an empty spool of thread. "This seems to be my lucky day," she said. "Such a sweet, sweet little spool to blow soap bubbles with, or to hang around my neck for a necklace. I'll go home and make one this very minute." However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby opened and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him and pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to punch and hit him. He cried and held his arms in front of his face to protect himself. "Give it to him, give it to him," cried the oldest and strongest of the boys, "so that he'll never dare to show himself on the street again." "Oh," said Annika, "it's Willie they're hurting. Oh, how can they be so mean?" "It's that awful Bengt. He's always in a fight," said Tommy. "And 5 against 1. What cowards!" Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bengt on the back with her forefinger. "Hello there," she said. "What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash out of little Willie with all 5 of you jumping on him at once?" Bengt turned around and saw a little girl he had never seen before, a wild-looking little stranger who dared to touch him. For a while he stood and gaped at her in astonishment. Then a broad grin spread over his face. "Boys," he said, "boys, let Willie alone and take a look at this girl. What a babe!" He slapped his knees and laughed, and in an instant they had all flocked around Pippi, all except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked cautiously over to stand beside Tommy. "Have you ever seen hair like hers, red as fire? And such shoes," Bengt continued. "Can't I borrow one? I'd like to go out rowing, and I haven't any boat." He took hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, "Ouch! I burned myself." Then all 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down and screaming, "Redhead, redhead." Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Bengt had hoped she would get mad and begin to cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. "I don't think you have a very nice way with ladies," said Pippi, and she lifted him in her strong arms high in the air and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over a branch. Then she took the next boy and hung him over another branch. The next one she set on a gate post outside a cottage, and the next she threw right over a fence so that he landed in a flower bed. The last of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that stood by the road. Then Pippi, Tommy, Annika, and Willie stood and looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless with fright. And Pippi said, "You are cowards, 5 of you attacking one boy. That's cowardly. Then you begin to push a helpless little girl around. Oh, how mean! Come now, we'll go home," she said to Tommy and Annika, and to Willie. "If they try to hurt you again, you come and tell me." And to Bengt, who sat up in the tree and didn't dare to stir, she said, "Is there anything else you have to say about my hair or my shoes? If so, you'd better say it now before I go home." But Bengt had nothing more to say about Pippi's shoes or about her hair either.